I used to be the friend that everyone came to for advice, and I still am. I'm the face of San Diego. I'm a writer, entertainer, and lifestyle coach. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure you visit my website, www.thefaceofsandiego.com. One thing that I've noticed a lot of in terms of just women in general is that we live our lives emotionally. And of course, I think the way we feel, our emotions, intuition, you know, those elements, those parts of ourselves are deeply important. But we have to be able to compartmentalize where these areas should be. But I think we really need to assign different parts of ourselves to different areas of our lives. You know what I mean? And really think deeply about how we make our decisions, okay? Because, I've seen women posting things like, for example, there's this one lady who, she posted something about leaving an unhealthy relationship that she was in for over a decade, right? And she met this new guy. She's really into him, right? He makes her feel, wonderful, X, Y, and Z. He's reliable. He's, you know, he offers her emotional support. He's there for her. He's understanding, etc. Right? But I think that, and I know a lot of different women are also kind of in this place where they were previously in really unhealthy relationships, and now they've met somebody new that makes them feel totally differently, and they think that this guy might be like the one, right? Or their future spouse or whatever. And it's really interesting because, you know, I kind of see this recurring theme of women being totally enamored with people who make them feel a certain way, right? And I think that, being more emotional or being more intuitive, you kind of have a more vivid, more potent imagination. And I think that that's why women in general fall in love maybe more quickly or more deeply, faster, right? And it can be really dangerous to kind of live life that way. You know what I'm saying? And you can find yourself in a variety of terrible situations because you partnered with somebody who made you feel a certain way. And so I think that if you have been in a previously dysfunctional relationship or an unhealthy relationship, that you really should take a step back and enter into a season of singleness, right? And it can be excruciating to have to let go of the hopes, the dreams, the fantasies of fantastic love that you might have had for your previous partner, right? They maybe made you feel great in a variety of ways, right? Because not every toxic or abusive relationship is the same, and from experience I can say that, sometimes abusive relationships are not abusive 24/7, but when there's abuse involved at any stage of the relationship, it is an unhealthy, abusive partnership. Okay, so, letting go of these things can be difficult because you're holding on to the good while suffering from the bad, right? And you meet somebody that's interested in you, and I know that when you leave a relationship that is, abusive and toxic, right, it can make you feel worse about yourself because you begin to kind of go into this cyclical way of thinking. What's wrong with me that I would stick around so long? what's wrong with me that I would attract this, or, just so many negative, self-destructive, self-loathing thoughts and emotions, right? And so, it's good to enter into a season of singleness because you're able to really um, heal your way through that. Sometimes when we don't work through what it was that injured us, whether if it's physically or emotionally, mentally, we wind up kind of living life in a mentally, emotionally crippled place. And that's really, that also is kind of a dangerous place to be, because if you meet somebody that's healthy and they're stable and they're reliable and they're actually good for you, you could wind up kind of sabotaging that relationship, right? I also wrote an article on that. But anyways, I really want to encourage you ladies to work through that, because when you don't do that, let's say you're presented with another potential partner, but they're not healthy, right? Let's say this is another unhealthy or abusive relationship that you're walking into, and you're not aware of the red flags because, what was obviously toxic or abusive in your last relationship kind of clouds your judgment. It makes you think, okay, this was good about this person, this was bad about this person, and that's kind of like the elementary, that initial processing that your mind has done to kind of help you navigate away from people who are obviously the same way, right? But sometimes you might be dealing with somebody who's a different kind of abuser, right? And those red flags are not apparent to you because you're so focused on the obvious red flags that manifested in that previous relationship. So I think it's really, really crucial to, go into that transition period without any distractions. Like if you recently left a relationship that was toxic or abusive, and what I mean by recent, I mean like within 12 to 24 months, okay? Because if you were in that unhealthy relationship for more than a year or 2 years, the lasting effects of that experience is going to take time. It's going to take time for you to process it. It's going to take time for you to really get a grip on what you didn't realize at first. You kind of have to trust the process. You know what I'm saying? And not just jump into the next relationship, because sometimes, those wounds, let's say you're still very wounded from the last relationship, right? And you meet somebody who, within the first few months, they're just great to you, right? They just are loving and they're caring, and they seem devoted, X, Y, and Z. They make you feel the way you haven't felt in a long time, or even ever before, right? And so you feel like this person is helping you heal from that past experience. But the thing is, in my opinion, nobody other than maybe you and God and maybe your family or your best friends, right? That close inner circle, nobody else should be really helping you heal, unless it's somebody who's also been through a similar experience and they're trying to coach you, or maybe even a therapist, right? Like people that will not cross boundaries with you because they're just not going to. Okay, I'm not going to go into that, but you know what I'm saying? Like people that are obviously supposed to help you. Okay, you cannot go into a relationship because you think or feel that this person is going to help you heal. Okay, all that's going to do is make this person too close too fast. Or I know sometimes We think, well, these are intimate relationships. Of course, we're supposed to be close. Yes, but there are boundaries. Even in a marriage, there are boundaries. You know what I'm saying? And I do think that the longer you're married, the more established you are with each other, you do become one, right? So those boundaries kind of sometimes, depending on what type of boundary we're talking about, right? Um, Sometimes shielding yourself isn't as important the longer you are down the line with each other. But within that first 5 years, you know what I'm saying? Or those first 2, 3 years, um, it's going to, you've got to be very careful that you're not getting too close too quickly, is basically my point. Um, and, you know, I think something else that we really, really need to think about is the person that we think is a potential match. You know what I'm saying? We can't be super impressed with the bare minimum. You know what I'm saying? You can't be impressed with what should come naturally, what is the right thing to do. Like, if you see them just displaying qualities of a healthy person, baby, that's the bare minimum. Okay? You can't be impressed with somebody because they're not violent. You can't be impressed with somebody because they fulfill their fatherly duties to their kids from previous relationships. That is, it's great. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be appreciative of them for that. But don't let them into your heart because they're doing what they're supposed to do. Okay? Anybody in their right mind who has at least a decent head on their shoulders will do what they're supposed to do. As a parent, as a functional person in society, you know what I'm saying? What do they do for you other than make you feel safe? Because as I said, safety is the bare minimum. It's great, but it's like that first stage of vetting a person. You know, your standards can't be so low. Your standards can't be so low to the point where, because they're not an abuser, they're already in your heart. You know what I'm saying? You can't be like, oh, well, they call me every day, so, I can't help but find myself falling in love because they're displaying a level of devotion that I've never experienced before. Sweetie, I'm not going to say that's the bare minimum because that shows obviously an initiative, right? And that's a great thing. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be glad about these things, because if you're interested in someone and they're consistently showing interest in you, then that's great. That lets them in the door. Okay? But then you gotta stop right there and say, okay, look, now what are you going to offer me if we're in a relationship? And they have to show it to you. You know what I mean? Are they generous with you? If they don't get anything out of the relationship, how do they treat you? You know what I'm saying? If they feel like, are you having, and then also another thing is, one thing I'll have to say, and I'll probably always say this in any relationship advice that I give, is having sex before marriage is just probably one of the worst things you could possibly do. Not necessarily from a spiritual perspective, although from a spiritual perspective, yeah, right? But having sex with somebody before marriage, it really puts you in a vulnerable place, okay? Not necessarily to get pregnant, right? Because you can be on birth control, right? But then what about sexually transmitted diseases? What about, I mean, bottom line, when it comes to sex and being in a sexual relationship with somebody, you're probably going to get yourself in a situation where if the relationship doesn't work out, you have to wrench yourself away from the relationship. Essentially, your heart breaks because you are tearing something away from another person, you know? And it's like, you could have prevented that by not having sex with them. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say within the first month or two, you're still getting to know somebody, but you're already having sex with them. Like, why would you do that? You know, like, let me just be totally straight up here. Why would you do that? You're essentially putting yourself at risk for heartbreak and, you know, just so many things. You don't want to get closer than you need to with somebody you really don't know. That's the point I'm making here. And so, it's crazy because it's just like, I feel like women, for the sake of love, sometimes they just act recklessly. You know what I mean? Like, if you've already been through something so terrible, why wouldn't you feel like you need to take the time to just shut it off? You know, shut off the dating, stop trying to fill the void with a new relationship. Like, just stop altogether for a season, you know? And really, really, really evaluate the entire situation, from the worst of what they did to the worst of what you did. You know, because there are many blurred lines when it comes to toxic and abusive relationships. You know what I'm saying? And what's really, really difficult is that if you spent a lot of time with somebody who abused you, what a lot of people don't realize, or what a lot of women don't realize, is that they become abusive themselves after a while. Whether if it's just verbally, right? You might become overly hostile. You just never really know how the relationship affected you until you've been out of it for a long time. I've witnessed in myself and in other people, when they're in or coming out of an abusive relationship where their partner was violent or just emotionally abusive, I would witness the person who was primarily the victim come out to basically do the same exact thing that happened to them, to other people. You know, and it took time, it took separation, it took real evaluation, and even sometimes experiencing the consequences of that behavior to really move out of it entirely, and that took time. Okay, so the point is, when you leave a toxic relationship, slow down. And trust me, when you are ready for a relationship, when you enter into that new relationship, you're not going to be afraid that this person is going to hurt you. Okay? You're not going to be, you might a little bit, but you will already, hopefully, if you do the work that I'll be prompting you to do, either in our one-on-one coaching, or just listening to the advice that I put out here on the podcast, you're not going to be too close too fast. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be able to have the knowledge and the insight to not have faulty personal boundaries. And boundaries are they're not just personal boundaries, they're intrapersonal. I think I'm using that phrase right. You know, it's not just the boundaries that you have for yourself, it's the boundaries that you place for other people too. Meaning, you don't treat other people a certain kind of way, and you also don't allow them to treat you any kind of way. You know what I'm saying? Those are whole holistic boundaries. You know what I'm saying? And so it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of thinking and talking to somebody who has a sound mind, okay? Because a lot of people have friends or family members that really don't give the greatest advice. They're not very wise, you know. They don't use discretion. You know, they might not even have the ability to think wisely, you know. So I don't know. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. You know, stay tuned for the next episode, and do definitely visit my website, www.thefaceofsandiego.com. Click on the tab, the advice column tab. This is friend to friend advice. Yeah, with all that being said, I will talk to you soon, and thank you for listening.